There are words that pass between athletes that never reach the public. Conversations that happen in the shadow of stadium corridors, in the stillness of a post-game clubhouse, in the brief and unguarded moments that exist between the final out and the return to ordinary life. Most of these words disappear. They are spoken, received, and absorbed quietly into the private histories of the people involved. But sometimes, a moment is so powerful, so genuinely human in a world that often feels manufactured and performative, that it refuses to stay private. It surfaces. It finds its way out through the honest emotion of someone who simply cannot contain what they experienced. That is exactly what happened with Edwin Diaz. When the former Mets closer, now wearing Dodger blue and standing in front of a media gathering that expected routine post-game commentary, began speaking about Shohei Ohtani, something shifted in the room. His voice changed. His composure, which had held through pressure situations that would have broken lesser men, began to crack. And then, without apology or embarrassment, Edwin Diaz revealed why the words Shohei Ohtani had spoken to him moved him to tears. This is that story. And it begins not with Diaz or Ohtani, but with a shocking statement from a man who used to manage them both. Carlos Mendoza did not become a major league manager by being careless with his words. He is precise. He is measured. He understands better than most that in the modern media environment, every sentence he speaks in front of a microphone carries weight that extends far beyond the immediate context in which it is delivered. That is what made his statement so striking. Speaking to the media during what was expected to be a standard availability session, Mendoza said something about the period surrounding Edwin Diaz's departure from the Mets that landed with a force nobody in the room had anticipated. He described a conversation, or more accurately, the absence of a conversation, that revealed a fracture in the relationship between the organization and one of its most iconic players at a moment when that player needed something more than a contract negotiation. Mendoza did not use dramatic language. He did not point fingers or assign blame in the way that former colleagues sometimes do when relationships have turned complicated. But the honesty in what he said was unmistakable. He acknowledged that during the period when Diaz was deciding his future, the environment around him was not what it should have been. That the support structures a player of his profile and his history deserved were not fully present. For a manager to say this publicly, to essentially confirm that an organization fell short of what one of its defining players needed, is extraordinary. It does not happen often. And the fact that Mendoza chose this particular moment, with Diaz now established on the other side of the country in a different uniform, made the statement feel less like criticism and more like confession. It was this statement that created the context for everything Diaz revealed afterward. To fully understand the weight of what Edwin Diaz experienced and what Ohtani's words meant to him, you have to understand what the journey from the Mets to the Dodgers actually represented, not professionally, but personally. Diaz did not leave New York because he stopped caring about the Mets. Anyone who watched him pitch in that uniform, anyone who heard the trumpet fanfare that became the soundtrack of his saves, anyone who witnessed the raw emotion he played with every single night understood that his relationship with that franchise and that city was genuine. It was not a business arrangement wearing the costume of passion. It was real. But professional baseball, at its highest level, is also a business. And there came a point where the signals coming from the organization, some spoken, some unspoken, told Diaz something that he did not want to hear. That the chapter was closing. That the next part of the story would be written somewhere else. Moving across the country at this stage of a career is not simply a logistical adjustment. It is an identity shift of the deepest kind. The city you play in, the fans who know your walkout music, the teammates who have become family over years of shared struggle, all of that changes at once. You arrive in a new place with a new uniform and a new set of expectations, and you have to rebuild something that took years to construct. Diaz arrived in Los Angeles carrying all of that. And it was in that vulnerable, transitional space that his first meaningful interaction with Shohei Ohtani took place. What Diaz described to the media about his early days with the Dodgers painted a picture that was different from what most people imagine when they think about joining baseball's most celebrated roster. The expectation, from the outside, is that everything about the Dodgers organization is seamless. That players arrive and are immediately absorbed into a winning culture that makes transition effortless. And in many ways, the organization delivers on that expectation. The facilities, the staff, the resources, all of it is exactly what the reputation suggests. But the human dimension of joining a new team, the process of finding your place, understanding the unspoken rhythms of a new clubhouse, establishing yourself not just as a player but as a person, that process does not happen automatically. It requires time. And it requires people. Ohtani, by the time Diaz arrived, was already the undisputed center of gravity in the Dodgers clubhouse. Not through authority or declaration, but through the natural force of who he is. Players orbit him, not in a dependent way, but in the way that people naturally orient themselves towards someone who radiates a certain quality of presence. What Diaz did not expect was that Ohtani would orient himself toward him. In those early days, before Diaz had fully found his footing in his new environment, Ohtani made a deliberate and unhurried effort to connect with him. Not through grand gestures. Not through the kind of performative teammate behavior that looks good in a locker room documentary but means nothing in real life. Through small, consistent, genuine moments of attention that communicated something simple and profound. You belong here. When Diaz described to the media what Ohtani actually said to him, the room went still in the way that rooms go still when something honest is happening. Ohtani had sought Diaz out specifically. He had learned enough about Diaz's history, his journey through professional baseball, what he had built in New York, what it had cost him to leave, to speak to it directly. And what he said was not the generic encouragement that veterans sometimes offer newer arrivals out of obligation. He told Diaz that what he had built in New York was not something that transferred. That what he had shown in that uniform, in that city, in those pressure moments, it was not erased by moving to a different team. It was carried. It lived in the people who witnessed it. And it would show up again here, in this new place, because it was never about the uniform to begin with. It was always about who Diaz is. He told him that the Dodgers were not getting a version of Diaz shaped by everything he had left behind. They were getting the real thing. The one who had already proven, in the hardest possible circumstances, what he was made of. Diaz, standing in front of reporters days later, struggled to get through the retelling of those words without his voice breaking. He is a man who has closed out playoff games. Who has stood on the mound in October with the weight of a stadium pressing down on him from every direction. He knows pressure. He knows how to manage emotion in high-stakes moments. But Ohtani's words, delivered quietly and without ceremony in the ordinary surroundings of a clubhouse on an ordinary day, reached something that competitive pressure never touches. They reached the person underneath the pitcher. And that person was not as composed as the one who stands 60 feet 6 inches from home plate. Read separately, Mendoza's shocking statement and Diaz's emotional media appearance are two interesting stories about baseball and human nature. Read together, they tell something far more complete. Mendoza's statement was an acknowledgement that organizations, even good ones, even well-intentioned ones, sometimes fail the people inside them in ways that matter. That the gap between what a player needs in a vulnerable moment and what they actually receive can open quietly, without anyone intending it, and that the consequences of that gap follow the player long after they have moved on. Diaz's tears were the living evidence of that gap. They were not tears of bitterness toward what he left. They were tears of recognition, the specific, overwhelming emotion that arrives when someone gives you something that you did not realize you had been missing until the moment you received it. Ohtani gave Diaz something that Mendoza, in his honest and painful statement, implicitly acknowledged the Mets organization had not fully provided in the moments when it mattered most. He gave him the experience of being truly seen. Of having someone take the time to understand his story, not the statistical story, not the contractual story, but the human story, and respond to it with genuine care. In professional baseball, where relationships are constantly filtered through the lens of performance and value and competitive self-interest, that experience is rarer than it should be. When it arrives, it lands hard. especially when it comes from the last person you might expect. This was not the first time a story like this emerged from the Dodgers clubhouse. It was not the first time a teammate, speaking publicly about their experience with Ohtani, struggled to maintain composure. There is a pattern. And the pattern reveals something important about who Ohtani is when the cameras are pointed elsewhere. He pays attention to people. Not selectively, not strategically, but genuinely. He notices when someone is navigating something difficult. He notices when the transition is harder than the player is letting on publicly. And he responds, not with advice or with the kind of wisdom dispensing that established veterans sometimes perform for younger teammates, but with presence. With the simple and powerful act of making someone feel that their experience is being registered by another human being who cares about it. This is not a small thing. In environments as competitive and emotionally complex as a major league clubhouse, the ability and willingness to extend this kind of attention to another person, especially a new arrival who is still finding their footing, is a form of leadership that does not appear in any scouting report. It cannot be measured or ranked or awarded. But it changes things. It changed things for Diaz. And the fact that Diaz felt compelled to stand in front of cameras and speak about it, voice cracking and composure fractured, is the most honest measure of how much it changed. American sports media is not easily moved. The journalists and analysts who cover baseball at the highest level have developed, through years of exposure, a certain practiced distance from the emotional narratives that sports generates constantly. They have heard locker room speeches. They have read heartfelt post-game quotes. They have watched the full range of human emotion play out in athletic contexts more times than they can count. But the response to Diaz's media appearance was different. The coverage that followed was not the detached, analytical kind. Writers who typically approach baseball stories with statistical frameworks and historical context found themselves writing in a register that those frameworks do not support. They were writing about kindness. About what it means to be seen by someone who has every reason to be focused entirely on themselves. About the particular power of grace extended across the complicated boundaries of professional competition by someone who does not need to extend it and does so anyway. Several prominent voices in American baseball media noted that the Diaz story, combined with Mendoza's statement, captured something essential about why Ohtani's presence in the sport matters beyond his performance. He is not simply raising the level of baseball being played. He is raising the standard of how people in the sport treat each other. And he is doing it the only way that standard ever actually rises, by modeling it, quietly and consistently, every single day. Edwin Diaz will take the mound many more times in a Dodgers uniform. He will face pressure situations that test everything he has built over a career defined by moments that lesser closers would have crumbled under. He will hear different music before his appearances. He will look into a different crowd. He will close out games for a different team in a different city. But he will carry what Ohtani said to him. He will carry it the way athletes carry the things that actually matter, not consciously, not as a mantra or a motivation, but as a settled truth that lives underneath everything else and shapes the way he moves through the world. Mendoza's shocking statement revealed a gap. Ohtani's heartwarming words filled it. And Diaz's tears, honest and unguarded in front of cameras that never expected to capture them, told the world something about all three men that statistics and standings never could. In baseball, as in life, what you say to someone in their most vulnerable moment is the truest measure of who you are. Shohei Ohtani passed that measure without hesitation. And Edwin Diaz, standing in front of the media, voice breaking, composure gone, made sure the world knew it.